Hello, and welcome to another She interview for She Leads Daily. I'm Natalia Crawford, and I'm the founder and editor-in-chief, and I'm super excited for our guest today. So today we're going to be featuring Kristin Molenaar, and she is the president and co-founder of Relevant Entrepreneur. Hi, Kristin. Welcome.
Hey, how are you? I'm so honored to be here.
I'm excited to have you. So I would love to just go ahead and dig in and maybe have you just start off by telling us a little bit more about yourself and your story.
Okay. All right. So, as Natalia said, I am Kristin and I am the co-founder and president of Relevant Entrepreneur. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Relevant Entrepreneur, I could talk about that, and that probably gives you an explanation of who I am, because what Relevant Entrepreneur is just basically who I am. So Relevant Entrepreneur is a platform that exists to equip and empower women to pursue the things that God has called them to do. So we do that through bringing in guest bloggers and guest trainers, and we also facilitate small groups and just general community among Christian women who have that calling that God has placed in their hearts to do something bigger for Him and for His kingdom. So that really encompasses who I am as a person. I am an entrepreneur enthusiast. I love Jesus, and I love being bold and about encouraging women to just do the things that God has put on their heart to do. That really kind of explains me in a nutshell, I would say.
That's perfect. So how did Relevant Entrepreneurs start?
Oh gosh. Okay. So Relevant Entrepreneur came about during 2015. I would have called myself, actually, I actively called myself a struggling entrepreneur. And I likened it to people that said that they were a starving artist. I was like that for the entrepreneur world. And God placed the idea of Relevant Entrepreneur in my heart. And the idea was to create a community that I needed. So a community where Christian women who knew how to build businesses and run businesses in a godly manner came to equip and empower the women that needed that knowledge. So God placed this idea on my heart, and immediately I said, cool, God, that's a great idea, but there's no way I'm doing it alone. Like, I was at that point, I was struggling financially, but I also just felt really lonely being an entrepreneur. And it was something that I didn't know that I would experience. So immediately I, asked God, okay, so if you want me to do this, you must have somebody in mind for me because this is not something I want to venture out into by myself. So I started racking my brain for people that could help me with this vision, and ultimately stumbled upon my co-founder, Rebecca Lutz, online, and I started cyber stalking her. She and I had never met. I ended up on her email list, and I cold pitched the idea of Relevant Entrepreneur to her on a Skype video call. Totally caught her off guard. And she pretty quickly agreed after asking me lots of questions, but she pretty quickly agreed. And then from there, the vision of how we would execute everything that Relevant Entrepreneur is, Rebecca and I began doing together over the next year and a half, also developing a very strong friendship, which shaped what Relevant Entrepreneur is today, because I realized that the loneliness of being an entrepreneur was something that we needed to tackle, that we needed to provide a place where women could come and be pointed to God, but also be pointed to other godly women, because I just don't think that we were called to do this alone. So that relationship really shaped a lot of the stuff that we do with Relevant Entrepreneur today.
Perfect. And so I would actually love to talk more about that, because I completely agree with you that I believe especially that as Christian women, as Christians, we are meant to work together as the body of Christ. And I think in the world, what you see is a lot of competition, and you see women competing with each other. And I really feel like, as in the Christian world, we shouldn't be that way. We're supposed to work together. We're supposed to help and support one another. So I agree with you 100%. And I'd love to hear more just about your partnership and how, why is it important to have a partnership or work with other people? And do you have any advice on, maybe there's a woman listening to this right now who says, I feel like I'm a lonely entrepreneur. How can I find a partnership or find other women to work with?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I find that this comes up a lot because Relevant Entrepreneur had two co-founders and we really started this thing together. I have some people ask, like, does that mean that I need a partnership and that I need to have a co-founder? And I don't think that everyone necessarily does. I think that that's something that's a very personal decision, and definitely you need to submit your loneliness to God and ask him what his solution for you is. But there are a couple different things. So if a partnership is something that you want, like, you have to be prayerful about it. And what I've learned, I've started several businesses and failed at several businesses and succeeded at some. And I've learned that it's so important when you're looking for that partnership, you need to find other people that have the same values as you. I think that what holds just the same as what holds my husband and I together in that partnership, what holds Rebecca and I together in our partnership is our priority is doing things God's way. And that really helps us stay on the same path in our business. So if you're looking for that partnership, I believe that if that is something that God has for you and he's telling you to do that, he'll help you find that person. And it could mean the same thing as me, like cyber stalking people and trying to figure out, is this person a Christian? Do they love Jesus? And then, cold pitching them ideas. Like that totally could be something that happens with the women watching. But also, if God doesn't call you to that level of partnership, that does not mean that he wants you to do it alone. So what I believe is a non-negotiable for any entrepreneur, especially Christian entrepreneurs, is that we have to have other women around us who understand the entrepreneurial vision. And what I tell people is it's kind of like a mom. Moms need mom friends because moms experience things that other people that are not moms do not understand. That's the same thing for entrepreneurs. We experience things like, online product launches that opt-in rates just seem awful, and like the fatigue that comes with running a business and figuring out how to get just so many things. I could go on and on with how many things we struggle with, but I think that everybody watching gets it. Entrepreneurs have unique struggles, and we need other women around us. So at Relevant Entrepreneur, we've created an atmosphere for that by doing what we call BB groups. So Rebecca and I started calling each other BB, like probably about a year ago. And that just to us means business bestie. Like we don't do pretty much anything without telling the other person about it, because we bounce ideas off of each other in business, because we can see the outsider perspective. Like I can run a sales strategy by Rebecca and she can say, well, what about this? And what about that? And I can't see that for myself. So everyone needs either one business bestie or a group of business besties. And at Relevant Entrepreneur, we have small groups that meet online and we bring them through a 6-week curriculum together that's written by Stephanie May Wilson. And the idea behind the BB groups is it's different than people would expect. It's not, let's jump in and start networking together. It's actually, let's start meeting together and peeling off the layers of how do you say this? Peeling off the layers of who we think we need to be and exposing who we actually are. So our BB groups are all about forming friendship based on authenticity and vulnerability, because we believe that from there, you're able to help each other in business from a unique and even more valuable perspective. Because like, if you and I are business besties and we're helping each other build our business on this like really intimate level, like I need to know things about you that you maybe do to self-sabotage. And you need to know things about me that I do that I self-sabotage. And you need to know some of the background about me to know that information. And So we really dive into like the real deep stuff with friendship.
Mm-hmm.
And then we tell people, okay, now you know each other, and now you can support and equip one another in a way that you wouldn't be able to do if you were just networking with each other. So it's totally different.
I love that. That's great. And I think, so one of the things that you mentioned was really being true to ourselves and knowing like who we are. So with that, like what led you into entrepreneurship, and how does that tie into the purpose that God has for you?
Okay. So what brought me into entrepreneurship? A couple things. Freedom has always been like a really big deal for me.
Mm-hmm.
When my husband and I were first married, we said to each other that we would rather work part-time jobs and have more freedom than have more money and less freedom. So we valued, almost from the get-go, we valued freedom over finances. And so I then started it's interesting because I could probably go back even further and talk about like what I did as a kid. Because as a kid, I was always into making money really odd ways. I did a stationery business with one of my best friends growing up, knocking door to door, selling stationery to people in the neighborhood. So like I've always kind of had this like something in me, the entrepreneur like brewing. But I think what kind of like put me over the edge was that desire for freedom. And I never felt very settled in any jobs that I had. Whenever I had a regular job, I wanted to know all the details about everything. Like I wanted to learn everyone's job. I wanted to know exactly how the entire business was run, which made me a great office manager and a project manager when I did those things. But I wanted skin in the game. Like I just wanted more. And so I started doing, different businesses. And when I look back, I can pinpoint my journey of entrepreneurialism. I'm like, oh, I've been doing this as a kid and I wanted freedom in my life, but I feel like God called me to it. I was experiencing those things because that's who God made me to be. And it has taken God giving me the idea of relevant entrepreneur and then actually executing it for me to really see that God has gifted me in these things. It's been an interesting process for me personally. But yeah, it all boils down to this is what God made me to do. And I'm doing it finally in the way that he's calling me to do it.
Yes, that's beautiful. I love that. So let's talk about your journey a little bit, because you mentioned, you started some businesses that succeeded, you started others that failed. And I think we've all experienced that. And I think one of the things that I see a lot of women struggle with is, they feel like, for example, let's say a woman feels like God called me to be an entrepreneur. So they go out, they start a business, it fails. They launch a product and it fails. And then all of a sudden that gets them thinking, oh, maybe I'm not really supposed to do this. Maybe God doesn't really want me to be an entrepreneur. Maybe I misunderstood. So as a Christian woman, like, what would you say from having experienced, failure and success, in terms of, what should we do when we experience failure? What does that really mean? And how can we move forward from that?
So I think if you're watching this and you're feeling like you're experiencing business failure and that means that you are not supposed to be an entrepreneur, I would be bold in saying maybe you don't understand exactly what entrepreneurship means. Because being an entrepreneur means that we're walking into things knowing that we're going to hit lots and lots of fails, but we have to pick ourselves back up and keep tweaking and keep doing new things and keep walking forward. If you're an entrepreneur, you have to have that resilience and that persistence if you want to be an entrepreneur, because even when you have a successful business, and I think that people might look at relevant entrepreneur and say like, this is successful and it may look easy. Like we've hit so many bumps in the road, and we've done things very publicly, like launching a membership area, which I'm not saying is a bad thing, because in a lot of capacities, I think it's really good, but it wasn't what we were supposed to do. And we had to admit, like, to everyone, oh, actually, we weren't supposed to do that. God wasn't calling us there. And we could have said, in our mind, that was our way of monetizing Relevant Entrepreneur. And that completely fell out from underneath us. And we could have easily said, okay, well, I wasn't called to this. Like, this business wasn't it, because there's no way to make money anymore. No, you just have to keep looking to God and trusting that even after you've fallen down, and even when you're feeling doubtful and you're feeling ashamed, I think sometimes of failure, success is picking yourself back up, looking at God and saying, okay, Lord, what do you have for me today? And doing that next thing. That's what success means as Christian women. It doesn't have, we aren't called to measure our success by the barometer that the world measures success by. We're supposed to walk in what we're supposed to do every day, moment by moment. And don't get caught up in thinking that failure means that you're a failure. No, that one thing didn't go where you thought it was going to go. But, you know, one of the beautiful things for me is I look back at some of the things that I did that were fails. And I realize when I'm doing things with Relevant Entrepreneur, oh, wow, I wouldn't know how to do this if I hadn't failed. I wouldn't know how to be this organized. I wouldn't know how to build this email sequence. I wouldn't know how to do all these different things. And that goes with being in a regular job too, and feeling like stuck in that job. God will bring it full circle and he'll reveal it to you. You just have to trust him. Don't give up unless he's said to you explicitly, okay, you're done with entrepreneurship. Unless he says that, you don't give up. You don't let the enemy win.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And so that makes me think a lot about obedience, you know, trust and obedience in God. And I don't know about you, but I know for me personally, one of the things that I've experienced is that it's almost like there's two different lanes. There's how to do business God's way and how to do business the world's way. And I know for me personally, I have experienced that struggle of, you know, watching webinars or taking courses or doing all these things. And everyone's telling you, this is how you succeed. This is how you do X, Y, and Z. And then, you know, learning these things and then feeling like God is saying, okay, well, actually, I want you to do this. And in my mind, I'm like, but that doesn't make sense. Like, did you watch the webinar on how to succeed? You know, like, they said, this is how you do it. And God said, no, this is what I want you to do. And you're like, it doesn't make any sense, you know, but with that, like, have you seen that too in your life, and just like being obedient to God, meaning a lot of times just trusting him when things don't make any sense?
Yeah, I absolutely have experienced that. And while you're talking, I'm thinking about how when we started Relevant Entrepreneur, we thought that our platform was going to be more about that, like, training. This is the way to be successful. We thought that that was going to be. And when I sit with God and ask him, okay, God, what do you want me to do today? 9 times out of 10, he tells me, show these women how to submit to me. Talk to these women about the struggles of being an entrepreneur and what it's like to put me as CEO of the business. And I've thought, really, God? But don't they need to know the path to success? And it's like, yeah, you're giving them the path to success. The path to success is to continually, daily submit to what I'm telling them to do. It's not about watching that webinar. It's not about putting together that sales funnel that people are telling you to put together. It's not about that. That is not why God calls us to be entrepreneurs. But it's so easy to get swept up in that, because the moment you become an admin of a Facebook page on Facebook and you join or follow one person's business account, you're flooded with ads about entrepreneurialism. You know, you're suddenly being targeted, and people are telling you, this is the path to success. You know, this is the right way. If you're failing, then you're doing this wrong. Gosh, that's not what God says. That's not what God says. You have to follow him. They're totally different. They're totally different. And sometimes God will tell you to take those steps that are in alignment with and using some of those things that you learned, like webinars. Like God could tell you to do webinars, and that's fine, but you don't do webinars just because so-and-so told you to do webinars.
Mm-hmm.
Do webinars because God said to do webinars. And the cool thing about doing that, doing it God's way, is you can then trust the outcome to God also. Mm. So when you're doing a webinar and I've done this, I've done webinars and I did them because I wanted to do webinars, and it was all on me. Like everything was on my shoulders. The outcome was on my shoulders. Everything was on my shoulders. And I don't think that I've actually done a webinar that God's told me to do, but I've done things like on, Facebook Live, and I've done videos and stuff. Mm-hmm. And when I do that, the outcome and what happens, that's on God, and it rests on his shoulders, and it really takes a lot of the pressure off of me. And I also can go into things with a whole lot more confidence, because I know if God's calling me to do this right now, then he's equipped me to do this, and he says the timing is right. And it just, you can have that God confidence.
That's good. One of our writers would call it Godfidence.
Yeah. And I love cute. That. Yeah, I really like that.
So I love that. Okay. So you said making God the CEO, and I loved that. And I want to talk about that because I think that as Christian women, it's very much our intention to do that, and we'll say, yes, God is first. It's so important. But I think we wake up and we want to have God as the CEO of our business, but then we open Facebook and we see all the ads about how to do X, Y, and Z, and we have all these emails, and there's all these we get flooded with all these things. So do you have any tips on just very practical ways that we can make God the CEO of our business, or how to, what do you do in order to implement that in your life?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. The first is daily alone time with God has to be a priority. When I started making this a priority, I really was able to walk into the business that God wanted me to walk into. I started spending time with God daily about 2 years ago now. It was not a daily practice before then. And Relevant Entrepreneur would not exist or be what it is if I had not started that. I needed that foundation in order to be able to get Relevant Entrepreneur to where it is. So that daily time with God is absolutely essential. For me, that includes journaling. So at first, my journaling started a lot with writing scripture and that stood out to me, and then talking about like my observations and the application in my life. So it's like called the SOAP process. So scripture, observation, application, and prayer. That's how I started. And sometimes I do something similar to that, but my journaling has become more and more my submission and vulnerability to God. And I think that God, oftentimes I look at my writings and think like, whoa, I didn't even write that. Like it started as me and it ended as God. And I think that that's a beautiful way to facilitate authenticity and vulnerability with God. Because when you get all that stuff out on paper, it's out there. God, you can see it. You can also see when there's not truth in some of the things that you're writing. And I feel like God uses that to expose the enemy's lies to us, because sometimes if we don't write it down or we aren't exposing the enemy's lies, they can just kind of fly under the radar and we don't see them. So I think that journaling process for me has helped expose the enemy's lies. So yeah, that God time, the journaling, and also the next thing that I think is really practical is turning off the consumption. As entrepreneurs, there is a season where we need to consume because we need to educate ourselves. But I believe that if you're doing this relatively full time, that probably shouldn't be more than 6 months. Definitely if you've been trying to pursue entrepreneurialism and you've been consuming for a year, it's time to consider turning off the how-to consuming. So no more webinars on how to do this, or, blogs on how to do that. I think that still reading things that are exposing God's truth to the matter, I don't think that you can overconsume in those ways. But for some people, it's time to just execute and to stop consuming. Consuming can leave you feeling like, oh, it has to be perfect in this way. Like, no, just have that daily time with God and ask him what he wants you to do that day. And if there's something that he needs for you to learn, that's different. But just this endless or mindless consuming, I think, is a trap that a lot of people fall into. And it pulls them away from trusting God as their CEO versus trusting that they have enough knowledge and making education that CEO.
That's really good. I like that. And I do think we have to be very cautious, because I've had many times where I know God tells me to do something and then someone tells me to do something else and it contradicts what he said. And they're not intending to contradict, they're telling you from their personal experience. And sometimes it's hard to say, okay, well, this person is successful. I should probably do what they're saying and say no to that, and instead say, I'm going to do what God's telling me to do, even though it makes no sense. And there's no like proven success, with his ways, but we know that his ways are always going to be successful. And it's funny because I feel like it's an ongoing cycle, at least for me, where I try to do things my way. They don't work. I do things God's way. They work. And then again, I try to, you know what I mean? It's just like,
yes,
like, okay,
I've been on that roller coaster.
Yes, like one day I'll get it,
Yeah.
But
it's a constant submission and realignment, and then being thankful that God's grace covers that. And thank God literally for grace, because we need it.
Oh yeah. And it's funny because I feel like sometimes I read my Bible and I read about the disciples and I'm like, don't they get it? And then I'm like, oh, I'm the same way. So I can't get frustrated with them. But so one of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, because I know you're very passionate about helping women, pursue what God has called them to do. You and I are very similar in that. And a lot of our readers, not all of them are entrepreneurs. So just generally when it comes to purpose, like, one of the questions I get a lot, or I see a lot of women struggling with, is like feeling like they don't have a purpose or not knowing what their purpose is. And I think you and I both believe, God made a purpose for every woman. It's there. He created you with it. But what would you say if someone is watching this right now and they feel like they don't have a purpose or don't know what it is?
Yeah. When I hear from people who don't know what their purpose is, it breaks my heart in some ways, because I know that struggle it's deep, and we all have that desire, to know, God, why? Like, why am I here doing, what am I supposed to do here? My advice would be, that's so hard. That's so hard. My advice would be that, one, you need to accept God's grace through this process and accept his timing. So I think that as humans, we want to control when we know things and when we do things. And I think it was on one of your Instagram posts that talked about like the different ages of entrepreneurs. Was this your blog or your Instagram post? The different ages of people that finally figured out their purpose.
Yeah.
There's no age, and there's no like magical like process of life. You're going to graduate high school and you're going to graduate college, and then boom, your purpose is going to be right there. Like the world wants to tell you that, but that's not necessarily how God works. So I just would encourage you not to beat yourself up over the fact that you don't have purpose, to let God's grace wash over you, and just accept rest. And if you are feeling that yearning, be purposeful in your prayer about what is my purpose. And I think that there's a lot of purpose to be had in what you may consider just being regular. And I think one of the things with our God-given giftings is, because we have them and because they're so normal to us, we don't really recognize that that's our gifting and that is part of our purpose. So for me, one of the example that I have is I'm very encouraging. That's just one of my spiritual gifts. Mm-hmm. And I've always been really encouraging. And even when I felt like I didn't have purpose, I was encouraging people. But I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that I didn't have purpose, but I had a lot of purpose. Encouraging people, there's a lot of purpose in that. Mm-hmm. So, maybe one in the self-awareness, I think a process or a commitment to self-awareness could be helpful. Taking a spiritual gifts test and figuring out what your God-given giftings are. I don't think that those are ever bad things to do. Asking those around you what their perception of you is will probably help you to see that you have more purpose than you think you might. And just allowing God to work in his timing, and don't ever lose hope that you do have a purpose.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love that. And then, so the last question I wanted to ask you, which we tend to do in all of our interviews, is if you had the entirety of Christian women in front of you right now, what would you say to them? What do you feel is the most important message that women would need to hear right now?
So as you said that, I looked to my bulletin board that's sitting on the right side of me here. And on one of the sticky notes, it really just sums up what I want to say. And I would say that because God is on your side, you will prosper despite you. So what that means is that as long as you're submitting to God and you're keeping him on your side, it doesn't matter if you screw up. It doesn't matter if you don't do things perfectly. It doesn't matter if the enemy's coming after you and sometimes you feel like you're really struggling and you're flailing around. God's on your side and you're victorious because of that. That is why we are victorious. We're not victorious because of us. We're not victorious of what we do. I'm not victorious because I have Relevant Entrepreneur, and you're not victorious because you have your businesses. We are victorious because Christ died for us to give us that victory. So we will prosper and we are victorious as women of God because of God, not because of us.
That's beautiful. I love it. Thank you so much. And I'll link to all of your accounts and everything, but do you want to just let everyone know if they want to connect with you, how they could find you?
Yeah. So the best way to connect with me is, you can check out our blog. So you can check out relevantentrepreneur.com. And what you'll see there is a bunch of amazing experts in the Christian business community providing advice and wisdom about how to build godly businesses. So you won't see me necessarily a ton on the website, but you could also follow us on Instagram. Instagram is like totally my jam. I love Instagram. So definitely follow us there. And then also we have a Facebook group of women who are very serious about pointing each other towards God. So that's another way to find us too. And so in Facebook, if you just search for Relevant Entrepreneur, you'll find our group there. Yeah, those are the best ways.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing all of your wisdom. It was so encouraging for me personally. So I know that it's going to be just absolutely encouraging for all of our community and everyone watching it. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Yeah, it really was a pleasure. I love just having conversations about how good God is and how he has a plan for each of us. And yeah, I love conversations like this. So it really was my pleasure. Thank you so, so much.
You're welcome. And I will talk to you soon.
All right. Bye.